They called him the Shadow of the Hofbug. Victor Hale, Count of Eldridge, owned half the trade routes of the empire and a heart sealed in iron. For 12 seasons he had never danced, never smiled, never chased. Yet when Miss Lydia Crow fled the opera hall in disgrace, something ancient cracked inside him. Vienna, April 1845. The chandeliers in Archduke Ferdinand's opera house burned like inquisitors. To Lydia Crow, impoverished ward in a refashioned emerald gown, they were merciless eyes watching her fall. The polka thundered, but she heard only her pulse. Tragic, isn't it? Baron Karl Voss murmured, swirling crimson wine. A crow reduced to rags. My villa on the Prater is still open to you, not as wife, of course. His words struck like poison in full view of the court. When Lydia recoiled, the chalice tipped, wine flooding his waistcoat and her skirt. Glass shattered. The orchestra died. Hundreds stared. Humiliation crushed the air from her lungs. A broken sob escaped. She ran, past silk and scorn, through velvet curtains into the night. No one moved to stop her. No one, except the man who had never moved for anyone. From the shadowed alcove, Victor Hale stepped forward, and Vienna's most untouchable heart began to beat. The silence that followed the crash of crystal was absolute, as though the entire opera house had been plunged underwater. Every fan stilled. Every breath was held. The polka's final triumphant note hung unresolved in the air like a scream cut short. Lydia felt the wine seep through the thin satin of her gown, cold at first, then warm as her own humiliation flooded in. Scarlet bloomed across the faded emerald like a mortal wound. Baron Karl Voss stood before her, his immaculate white waistcoat now streaked with the same blood-red stain, his face contorted in theatrical outrage. "You clumsy little beggar," he shouted, loud enough for the uppermost galleries to hear. "Look what you've done. That rag you're wearing wasn't worth the wine now ruining it." A ripple of cruel laughter fluttered through the boxes. Matrons lifted lorgnettes to better inspect the spectacle. Gentlemen smirked behind gloved hands. Lydia's vision blurred, whether from tears or the blaze of 1,000 candles, she could no longer tell. She searched the crowd for one kind face. Her guardian, Sir Reginald Crowe, was nowhere to be seen, no doubt deep in brandy and cards at some nearby gaming hell. There were no allies here, only spectators eager for the kill. Voss dabbed at his waistcoat with a lace handkerchief, regaining his composure with practiced ease. "Hysterical creature," he announced to the room, forcing a laugh. "One offers charity to the unfortunate, and this is the thanks one receives, an assault upon one's person." More laughter, sharper now. The orchestra lifted their bows, preparing to resume, as if a woman's ruin were merely a brief, amusing interlude. Lydia's chest constricted until she could scarcely draw breath. A raw, jagged sound tore from her throat, a sob she could not swallow. She could not remain here another heartbeat beneath their dissecting gaze. With a desperate cry, she turned and fled. Her slippers skidded on the polished marble as she shoved past startled ushers and footmen in powdered wigs. The emerald skirts, heavy with spilled wine, tangled around her legs, but she did not slow. She burst through the velvet curtains at the rear of the hall, past the gilded columns, and into the grand foyer where the air was cooler but no less suffocating. Behind her, the murmur of the crowd swelled again, a tide of gossip already rising. She did not look back. She could not. Unseen in the shadowed alcove above the staircase, Count Victor Hale watched her go. He had observed the entire scene unfold with the stillness of a predator long accustomed to patience. From his vantage, half hidden by a marble pillar, he had noted every detail: the way Lydia had held her head high despite the outdated gown, the tremor in her fingers as she gripped the program, the exact moment Voss's cruelty had pierced her composure. When the wine spilled and the hall fell silent, something inside Victor, something he had believed long dead, shifted. He moved. Not hastily, counts did not scramble, but with deliberate, lethal grace. His black evening coat swirled like raven wings as he descended the marble stairs, the crowd parting instinctively before him. Whispers followed in his wake, astonished and fearful. The shadow moves. After the Crow girl? Impossible. Victor paid them no heed. His storm-gray eyes were fixed on the direction Lydia had vanished. He reached the foyer just as the great doors swung open, admitting a gust of cold April rain. Outside, thunder rumbled over the rooftops of Vienna. Lightning illuminated the wet cobblestones of the Ringstrasse for a fleeting instant, revealing Lydia's slight figure stumbling toward the gardens beyond the opera house, emerald skirts plastered to her legs, auburn hair escaping its pins and wild tendrils. Victor did not hesitate. He signaled his footman waiting beneath the portico. "My coat. Now." The servant hurried forward with a heavy wool greatcoat lined in sable. Victor shrugged it on but did not button it. Rain lashed his face as he strode out into the storm, boots ringing against stone. He had spent years perfecting detachment. He had watched society devour its own with cold indifference. He had sworn never to intervene. But tonight, watching Lydia Crow break beneath their teeth, the ice around his heart had cracked, and something fierce and long buried had begun to burn. The rain fell in relentless sheets, turning the formal gardens behind the opera house into a glistening labyrinth of shadowed hedges and marble statues. Lightning forked across the sky, briefly illuminating Lydia's fleeing figure as she stumbled deeper into the storm, her soaked gown clinging like a shroud. She reached a small pavilion overlooking an ornamental pond, collapsing onto a stone bench beneath its meager shelter. The emerald satin was ruined beyond repair, dark with wine and rain, heavy as chainmail. She buried her face in her trembling hands, shoulders shaking with silent sobs that the thunder swallowed whole. She did not hear the footsteps on the gravel until they were nearly upon her. Lydia's head snapped up, eyes wide with fresh panic. A tall silhouette loomed at the edge of the pavilion, broad-shouldered, cloaked in black, rain streaming from the edges of a sable-lined greatcoat. For a heartbeat she thought it was Voss come to finish what he had started, and she scrambled backward, slipping on the wet stone. "Please," she choked, raising a hand as if to ward off a blow. "I'm leaving Vienna tonight. Just let me go." The figure stepped into the faint glow cast by a distant gas lamp. Count Victor Hale. His dark hair was plastered to his forehead, rain tracing sharp lines down his angular face. Those storm-gray eyes, famous for their indifference, were fixed on her with an intensity that stole what little breath she had left. Water beaded on his lashes. His lips were set in a severe line. He looked less like a man and more like some avenging statue come to life. He did not speak at first. Instead, he unfastened the heavy greatcoat with deliberate movements and swung it around her shoulders in one fluid motion. The wool was still warm from his body, carrying the faint scent of bergamot, leather, and something darker, smoke perhaps, or midnight itself. It engulfed her, the hem pooling on the wet ground. Lydia clutched the edges instinctively, staring up at him in stunned silence as he knelt, heedless of the mud ruining his evening trousers, until their eyes were nearly level. "I am not here to harm you," Victor said at last. His voice was low, precise, edged with something that might have been anger, though not directed at her. "I am here to take you from this place." She let out a broken laugh, half hysteria. "Take me where, my lord? I have no home left to return to. By dawn the bailiffs will have stripped even the walls bare." Victor's gloved hand reached out, pausing a fraction before gently enclosing her icy fingers in his. The contact was careful, almost reverent, yet the strength in his grip was unmistakable. "Baron Voss will trouble you no further," he said quietly. "I have seen to that." Inside the opera house, moments earlier, the scene had shifted like a thunderclap. As the orchestra prepared to resume and Voss basked in the court's approving laughter, a single word had sliced through the hall. Silence. It was spoken softly, yet it carried the weight of imperial decree. Every head turned toward the shadowed alcove. The crowd parted as if cleaved by an invisible blade. Victor Hale descended the grand staircase with the unhurried menace of a panther. Dressed entirely in black save for the stark white of his cravat, he radiated a chill that seemed to lower the temperature of the entire hall. Whispers rippled in his wake, fearful, awestruck. Voss's smug expression faltered as the count stopped before him. "Your Grace," Voss stammered, attempting a bow that came out crooked. "A trifling matter, the girl is unstable." "You will address me properly," Victor interrupted, his tone flat and lethal. "Or not at all." Voss's mouth snapped shut. "You insulted a lady in public," Victor continued, voice carrying effortlessly to the furthest boxes. You laid hands upon her person. You mocked her distress when she fled your cruelty. Voss flushed crimson. She spilled wine on me? Deliberately. Send the bill to Eldritch Palace, Victor said, eyes never leaving Voss's face. And while you are there, send your seconds. I find your continued existence offensive. A collective gasp swept the hall. A duel. The shadow of the Hofbug, reclusive, untouchable, had just challenged a man over a penniless ward he had never publicly acknowledged. Voss paled to ash. Surely, your grace, a misunderstanding. Victor turned his back, an unforgivable cut in Viennese society, and signaled the master of ceremonies with a flick of 2 fingers. My carriage. Immediately. But the second act, the man began. I have lost my appetite for entertainment, Victor replied, already striding toward the doors. The crowd watched in stunned paralysis as the most powerful peer in the empire walked out into the storm, after Lydia Crow. Back in the pavilion, Lydia stared at Victor as though he were a hallucination conjured by despair. You challenged him? For me? I have done more than that, Victor said. He rose, drawing her gently to her feet. The greatcoat swallowed her frame, making her seem fragile beside his height. Marry me. Tonight. By special license. The word struck her like lightning. She stepped back, nearly slipping again. You cannot be serious. I am never anything else. But why? Her voice cracked. You could have any woman in Europe. Princesses beg for a glance from you. Why would you bind yourself to a ruined nobody? Victor's gaze flicked toward the distant lights of the opera house, where music had resumed as though nothing had happened. A shadow crossed his features, something old and painful. Because you never tried to catch my eye, he said quietly. Because for 3 years I watched you endure the city's venom with quiet courage. I do not want to practice court beauty. I want a woman who knows how to survive. He offered his arm, rain still streaming down his face. Come with me, Lydia. By morning, no one will dare speak ill of you again. Voss will bow. The creditors will grovel. You will be untouchable. She stared at the proffered arm, strong, steady, a lifeline in a raging sea. It was madness. It was salvation. Thunder rolled overhead. Lydia placed her trembling hand upon his sleeve. Victor's fingers closed over hers, warm and possessive. Without another word, he swept her into his arms and carried her through the storm toward the waiting carriage, the rain washing away the last traces of her tears. The shadow of the Hofbug had finally emerged, and Vienna would never be the same. The carriage rocked violently through the storm-slicked streets of Vienna, its lanterns casting wild, dancing shadows across the velvet interior. Lydia sat huddled in Victor's greatcoat, the heavy wool still holding the heat of his body, though the chill of shock had settled deep in her bones. Rain hammered the roof like impatient fists. Across from her, Victor Hale occupied the opposite seat, his posture impeccably straight despite the lurching motion. He had not spoken since lifting her inside and giving terse orders to the coachman. His storm-gray eyes studied her with unreadable intensity, as though memorizing every tremor of her lips, every stray curl plastered to her cheek. Lydia pulled the coat tighter. You are trembling, Victor observed at last, his voice cutting through the rhythmic clatter of hooves and wheels. I am terrified, she admitted, too drained for pretense. You are the Count of Eldritch, the shadow of the Hofbug, and I am the woman who was laughed out of the opera an hour ago. This feels like a fever dream. I expect to wake in my attic room with the rain leaking through the ceiling. Victor leaned forward slightly, the movement deliberate in the confined space. This is no dream, Lydia. And you will never again sleep beneath a leaking roof. He reached into an inner pocket of his evening coat and withdrew a thick sheaf of parchment, folded and sealed with red wax. He held it out to her. She took it with numb fingers. What is this? Your guardian's debts, he said calmly. Every marker from the gaming tables at the Jockey Club, every loan from the moneylenders in the Judenplatz, the mortgage on the estate in Lower Austria. I purchased them all 3 days ago. Lydia stared at the documents, the broken seals of creditors she recognized all too well. 3 days ago? But tonight at the opera. I intended to intervene quietly, Victor interrupted, his tone measured. I knew Sir Reginald was on the brink of total collapse. I knew Voss was circling, waiting for you to become desperate enough to accept his disgusting offer. My original plan was to offer you a position as companion to my aunt in the country, far from Vienna, far from predators. His eyes darkened. But then I saw you tonight. I saw you endure Voss's venom with your chin high until the moment you broke. Companionship was no longer enough. You need armor, Lydia. My name is the strongest armor in the Empire. The carriage slowed, turning through towering wrought iron gates emblazoned with the Eldridge crest, a rearing stag against a field of stars. They rattled up a long gravel drive toward a palace that seemed carved from midnight itself. Eldridge Palace, a fortress of pale stone flanked by ancient oaks, its windows glowing like watchful eyes. Lydia's breath caught. "What do you gain from this?" she whispered. "A wife trailing scandal. A guardian drowning in vice." Victor gazed out at the approaching lights. "I gain silence," he said cryptically, "and perhaps something authentic in a world built on lies." The carriage halted beneath a sweeping portico. Footmen in silver and black livery stood at rigid attention despite the downpour. Victor descended first, then turned and offered his hand. This time Lydia took it without hesitation, stepping down into a new reality. Inside, the palace was a cathedral of marble and shadow. Suits of ancestral armor lined the vast entrance hall, silent sentinels gleaming in the candlelight. An elderly woman with iron-gray hair and a ring of keys at her waist awaited them. "Mrs. Hartmann," Victor greeted her with a nod. "Prepare the sapphire suite for the future countess. And summon Father Anselm to the private chapel at once." The housekeeper's eyes widened a fraction, the only betrayal of astonishment, before she curtsied deeply. "Immediately, Your Grace." The next hour blurred into a dreamlike haze. Maids whisked Lydia away to a chamber larger than any house she had ever lived in. They stripped away the ruined emerald gown, bathed her in steaming water scented with rose and bergamot, and dressed her in a simple yet exquisite gown of white silk that had been hastily retrieved from the palace wardrobes. When she caught her reflection in a tall mirror, she barely recognized the woman staring back, pale, wide-eyed, but with a new steadiness in her shoulders. She was led down a dimly lit corridor to the private chapel, a small ancient space of dark wood and stained glass, lit solely by dozens of flickering candles. Rain lashed the windows, turning the colored panes into rivers of jewel-toned light. Victor waited at the altar, having changed into severe black evening dress. His hair was still damp from the storm, curling slightly at the collar. Father Anselm, a bewildered priest roused from sleep, stood clutching his prayer book, vestments thrown over his nightshirt. "We are ready," Victor said simply. There were no flowers, no music, no witnesses beyond the rain and the candle flames. Only the ancient words, spoken in the hush of midnight. "I, Victor Alexander Hale, take thee, Lydia Elizabeth Crowe." His voice was steady, resonant, filling the chapel like incense. "I, Lydia Elizabeth Crowe, take thee, Victor Alexander Hale." Her own voice trembled but did not break. When the moment came for a ring, Victor drew a heavy gold signet from his smallest finger, warm from his skin, far too large for her. He slid it onto her ring finger and covered it with his own hand to hold it in place. "With this ring I thee wed," he murmured, gray eyes locked on hers. The contact sent a jolt through her, not cold but searingly alive. "I pronounce you man and wife," Father Anselm whispered, relief evident in his tone. Victor did not kiss her lips. Instead, he lifted her hand and pressed his mouth to her knuckles in a gesture of solemn reverence. "Sleep now, Lydia," he said softly, releasing her. "You're safe. Tomorrow the battle begins." He escorted her to the door of the sapphire suite himself, then turned away without another word, leaving her alone in the vast, canopied bed. Exhaustion claimed her almost instantly, the sound of rain a distant lullaby against the windows. She woke to winter sunlight pouring through heavy brocade curtains. For a disorienting moment she reached for the familiar rough blanket of her old attic room. Then her fingers met cool, luxurious linen. Memory flooded back. The opera, the humiliation, the storm, the chapel. The ring, Victor's ring, still weighed heavily on her finger. A young maid entered bearing a breakfast tray and a bright smile. "Good morning, Your Grace. His Grace requests your presence in the morning room when you are ready. He says there is a matter requiring your attention." "Your Grace." The title echoed strangely in her mind as she rose. The maid gestured to a rail of garment bags newly arrived from Vienna's finest modiste, dresses in deep sapphire, soft ivory, rich burgundy, all perfectly fitted as if by magic. Lydia chose a morning gown of smoke-gray silk with delicate silver embroidery. When she descended the grand staircase, footmen bowed deeply, housemaids curtsied, murmuring "Your Grace" in awed tones. She was no longer invisible. The morning room overlooked frost-laced gardens. Victor sat at a long table reading correspondence, a cup of black coffee beside him. He looked rested, immaculate in a charcoal waistcoat. But he was not alone. Standing awkwardly near the windows, disheveled and pale, was her guardian, Sir Reginald Crowe. Beside him fidgeted the family solicitor, clutching a worn leather case. "Lydia!" Sir Reginald exclaimed, starting forward with outstretched hands and a calculating gleam in his bloodshot eyes. "My dear girl, Duchess now they tell me? You clever thing, keeping such a secret from your old guardian." Lydia froze in the doorway, old instincts urging her to shrink, to appease. Then she felt Victor's gaze upon her. He did not rise, did not speak, only watched with that impenetrable calm, handing her the reins. She stepped fully into the room, chin high, and took the seat Victor indicated, at the opposite end of the table, a position of equal authority. A footman poured tea for her without being asked. Sir Reginald faltered, smile slipping. Victor folded his letter with deliberate care. "Sir Reginald believes your marriage erases his obligations. That my fortune is now his salvation." "Naturally," Sir Reginald blustered, recovering. "Family looks after family." "You have no claim here," Victor said, voice dropping the temperature 10 degrees. "You forfeited rights when you gambled away her mother's jewels, when you left her to wear rags while you drank yourself senseless, when you abandoned her last night to Voss's cruelty." Sir Reginald turned pleading eyes to Lydia. "Lydia, surely you won't let him?" Victor's gaze shifted to her, softening imperceptibly. "Partnership, not command." "The debts are mine now," he said quietly. "I gifted them to my wife this morning. She holds your fate." Silence stretched, broken only by the ticking of a porcelain clock. Lydia looked at the man who had raised her, and failed her, at every turn. She rose slowly. "You will leave Vienna today," she said, voice clear and unwavering. "You will reside in the dower cottage on the estate. The main house will be shuttered. You will receive an allowance sufficient for bread and firewood, but not for brandy or cards. Should you gamble again or appear in Vienna uninvited, the allowance ends, and you will find yourself in debtor's prison before sunset." Sir Reginald gaped, face purpling. "You cannot." "I am the Countess of Eldridge," Lydia said, the title ringing like steel. "And I am finished being afraid of you." Victor nodded once to the footmen. "Escort Sir Reginald to the station. He has a train to catch." As her guardian was led away sputtering protests, Lydia sank back into her chair, knees suddenly weak. Victor watched her, the faintest curve touching his lips. "Well done," he said softly. Before she could reply, the doors burst open again. The butler entered, face pale. "Your Grace." A party in the grand foyer. Baron Voss, his mother, and several court ladies. "They demand to see the impostor. They claim abduction." Victor set down his cup with perfect control. He rose and offered Lydia his arm. "Then let us not keep the vultures waiting, my countess." The grand foyer of Eldridge Palace echoed with indignant voices as Victor and Lydia descended the sweeping marble staircase together. Below, Baron Karl Voss stood at the center of a small delegation, his mother, the Dowager Baroness, clutching her pearls like a shield, flanked by two of the most formidable patronesses of Viennese society. Their demands for the abducted ward still hung in the air when the couple appeared at the balustrade. Victor's hand rested lightly at the small of Lydia's back, a subtle claim of possession and protection. They paused 3 steps from the bottom, forcing the intruders to crane their necks upward. "You requested the Countess of Eldridge?" Victor's voice was velvet over steel, carrying effortlessly through the vast space. "Here she is." A stunned hush fell. Lydia, in smoke-gray silk that shimmered like moonlight on water, her hair swept into an elegant chignon adorned with sapphire pins, bore little resemblance to the trembling girl who had fled the opera. Her posture was regal, her expression serene yet distant, as though she observed them from a great and unassailable height. Voss's face mottled with rage. A sham. Performed in haste under duress. "By special license," Victor interrupted smoothly, "in the presence of Father Anselm and the eyes of God. The papers are already lodged with the Archbishop." The Dowager Baroness gasped. One patroness lifted her lorgnette, reassessing. Voss stepped forward, voice rising. "Lydia, tell them the truth. Tell them he dragged you into the storm, forced." Lydia released Victor's arm and descended the final steps alone. The silk whispered against marble. She stopped directly before Voss, close enough to see the sweat beating at his temples. "Lord Voss," she said, her voice clear and steady as a bell in winter air. "You mistake the events of last night." The room stilled. "I wept in the garden, yes. I wept because a man I once believed honorable humiliated me before the entire court. I wept because I felt utterly alone." She paused, letting the words settle like frost. "Count Eldridge did not force me. He offered what you and your circle never did, respect. I married him because he is the finest man I have ever known. I would choose one day as his wife over a lifetime enduring your presence." Silence, thick, suffocating silence. Voss opened and closed his mouth soundlessly. Lydia turned her cool gaze to the patronesses. "My reputation is now whatever I declare it to be. Yours, however?" She let the implication hang. Victor's hand returned to her back, warm and steady. He addressed the senior patroness with courteous frost. "I trust, madam, you will correct any lingering misconceptions regarding my wife's honor." The woman, long accustomed to sensing which way power flowed, curtsied deeply, a gleam of admiration in her eyes. "Of course, your grace. The tale of such a whirlwind romance will be the talk of Vienna. Most enchanting." She turned a withering glare on Voss. "Come, Baron. We have imposed long enough." The delegation retreated in disarray, Voss trailing last, his defiance crumbling into bewildered defeat. As the great doors closed behind them, Lydia exhaled a breath she had held for years. Victor's fingers tightened briefly on her arm. "Steady," he murmured for her ears alone. "You were magnificent." The adrenaline ebbed, leaving her lightheaded. He guided her away from the public halls, through quieter corridors lined with ancestral portraits whose eyes seemed less judgmental now. They entered the west wing, older, warmer, scented with beeswax and aged leather. Victor opened a heavy oak door to reveal a circular library bathed in winter sunlight. Floor-to-ceiling shelves groaned under centuries of books. A fire crackled in a stone hearth flanked by deep leather armchairs. A broad desk stood beneath tall windows overlooking snow-dusted gardens, covered in maps, ledgers, and astronomical charts. He closed the door softly behind them. "This is where I live," he said quietly. "The rest of the palace is for the Count. This room is for Victor." Lydia wandered in, trailing gloved fingers along spines, Voltaire beside Goethe, treatises on astronomy beside volumes of poetry. She paused at a small volume on a side table, Homer's Odyssey in the original Greek. "Why bring me here?" she asked, turning to him. The bravado of the foyer had faded, leaving raw curiosity and a trace of fear. "You have defended me, saved me, given me your name. Yet I do not know you, Victor. Truly. Why me? There are dozens of women wealthier, better connected." He moved to the hearth, staring into the flames as though searching for words among the embers. Firelight carved sharp shadows across his features, softening the usual severity. "Do you know why they call me the Shadow?" he asked at last. "Because you are cold," she answered honestly. "Because you keep the world at a distance." "Because I once felt too much," he corrected, voice low. "My mother married my father for title and fortune, not love. I watched her indifference carve him hollow. When he died, broken by a woman who never cared, I swore no one would ever hold that power over me again. I built walls of ice to keep the pretenders out." He crossed to a corner where a large easel stood draped in black velvet. "I have watched you for nearly 2 years, Lydia." She froze. "I saw you at the Archduchess's musicale in that too large amber gown. While others mocked the young pianist's mistakes, you listened with genuine attention and applauded warmly so she would not feel ashamed." His fingers closed on the velvet cloth. "I saw you in the Prater, breaking your own bread to feed the swans when you looked half-starved yourself. I saw you sit beside your guardian through nights of fevered delirium, enduring his drunken insults without complaint." He pulled the cloth away. Lydia's breath caught. It was not a formal portrait. It was a charcoal sketch, vivid, intimate. A muddy street scene on the Graben last winter. An overturned carriage, shouting drivers, onlookers in furs. In the foreground, a woman knelt in the slush, skirts ruined, carefully binding the paw of an injured stray dog with strips torn from her petticoat. It was her. "I was in the carriage opposite," Victor said, stepping close behind her. His voice was rough with memory. "I drew this that same night. That was the moment I knew I wanted you, knew I could never have you. You were light where I was shadow. I told myself I was too damaged, too cold." He turned her gently to face him. "But last night when I saw you run, when I imagined Voss or any other laying claim to you, something shattered. The ice broke Lydia. Irreparably. Her eyes filled, but the tears were not of sorrow. "You saw me," she whispered, "when I thought no one ever did. I have always seen you." His gloved hand rose to cup her cheek, thumb brushing away a tear that had escaped. "And I will spend the rest of my days ensuring the world sees you as I do, as my equal, my partner, my heart." The space between them vanished. Lydia rose on her toes as Victor bent to her, their lips meeting in a kiss that began tentative, reverent, and swiftly became something fierce and consuming. Years of silent longing poured into it. His restraint finally unleashed, her fear transformed into trust. His arms banded around her, lifting her slightly as she clutched his coat. The taste of bergamot and warmth and home flooded her senses. The library fire crackled, the snow fell silently outside, and for the first time in 12 seasons, the shadow of the Hofburg burned. But just as the kiss deepened, a sharp rap sounded at the door. Victor broke away with a low growl of frustration, forehead resting against hers. "Enter," he barked. The butler appeared, apologetic. "Forgive me, your grace. A courier from the Hofburg. Urgent summons from His Imperial Majesty." Victor straightened, the mask sliding back into place though his eyes still blazed. He took the sealed parchment, broke the imperial wax and scanned the contents. Lydia watched the warmth drain from his face, replaced by grim fury. "What is it?" she asked, dread pooling in her stomach. Victor crushed the parchment in his fist. "Not congratulations. A challenge. The Emperor questions the validity of our marriage." "On what grounds?" His jaw clenched. "A betrothal contract signed 20 years ago by my late father, with the Kingdom of Bavaria. The princess has arrived in Vienna to claim her count." Outside, the snow began to fall harder, a gathering storm over the fragile new world they had only just begun to build. The imperial carriage thundered through Vienna's snow-dusted streets toward the Hofburg, its black-lacquered sides gleaming under torchlight. Inside, the silence between Victor and Lydia was thick with unspoken fears. Snowflakes swirled against the windows like frantic moths. Lydia clutched Victor's hand. "They cannot annul it," she whispered. "The vows were spoken before God." Victor's jaw was carved from granite. "They will try. But I have lived 30 years for duty and title. I have lived only one day for you. If the choice is between empire and you, the choice is made." The Hofburg Palace loomed, a sprawling fortress of pale stone and golden eagles. They were ushered not to a grand audience chamber but to the emperor's private crimson salon, heavy with brocade and the cloying scent of imperial incense. Emperor Ferdinand sat upon a gilded chair, looking petulant beneath his laurel crown. Beside him stood the Bavarian ambassador, stiff in formal uniform, and a young woman of striking beauty, Princess Amalia of Bavaria. Tall, golden-haired, with ice-blue eyes and a gown of silver tissue, she regarded them with cool detachment. "Ah, Eldridge," the emperor drawled, toying with a jeweled snuff-box. "And the inconvenience." Victor did not bow deeply, only the precise inclination due from one of the empire's greatest peers. He drew Lydia forward to stand at his side. "This is my wife," he said, voice ringing clear. "Her Grace, the Countess of Eldridge. You will address her accordingly, Your Majesty." The emperor's brows rose. "A wife acquired rather suddenly, we hear. The ambassador brings troubling documents. A betrothal contract signed by your late father and the King of Bavaria 20 years ago. You were promised to Princess Amalia upon her majority. Today is her 20th birthday." The ambassador thrust forward a parchment heavy with seals. "Binding in international law. The alliance strengthens trade routes through the Alps. You must set aside this hasty union, or the crown will declare it void, for treason against treaty obligations." Lydia felt the floor tilt. Treason. Ruin. Exile. She glanced at Victor. His face was a mask, but his hand tightened protectively around hers. He was prepared to fight, to lose everything for her. But Lydia looked at Princess Amalia, standing silent and composed. Something in the young woman's eyes, resignation, perhaps even pity, stirred her courage. She stepped forward, releasing Victor's hand. Victor's voice was a low warning. "Lydia." "Your Highness," Lydia said, sinking into a deep curtsy before the princess, ignoring the men entirely. "May I speak directly?" Amalia blinked, surprised by the breach of protocol. After a pause, she nodded. "You may." The emperor spluttered. "This is highly irregular." Lydia kept her gaze on Amalia. "Do you love him?" The question hung in the perfumed air like a blade. The ambassador choked. Love is irrelevant. This is a matter of state. I asked the princess, Lydia said quietly but with steel beneath. Amelia's perfect mask cracked for the first time. A flicker of sorrow and relief crossed her features. I have met his grace only today, she said softly, her voice carrying the lilt of Munich. And my heart belongs elsewhere. To a lieutenant in my father's guard who possesses no title, no fortune, only devotion. The ambassador hissed her name in warning. Victor moved then, reaching into his coat. He withdrew not a weapon but a slim leather-bound ledger. Your Majesty, he said, voice calm and lethally polite. We speak of binding contracts. Let us discuss contracts. He opened the book. I hold the promissory notes for the recent renovations to Schönbrunn Palace. I hold the debts incurred for the Congress of Vienna celebrations remaining unpaid. And I hold your Majesty's personal gaming obligations, to the sum of 400,000 gulden. The Emperor's face drained of color. If steps are taken to annul my marriage, Victor continued, I will call in every marker by sunset. The imperial treasury will collapse. Parliament will revolt. The scandal will not be my wedding, sire, it will be the crown's insolvency. Dead silence. Snow tapped softly against the windows. Victor closed the ledger with a soft, final snap. The princess has no desire for this union. I have none. And your Majesty, his gaze was unyielding, cannot afford to force it. The Emperor dabbed his forehead with a lace handkerchief, eyes darting between the ledger and the furious ambassador. Well, he muttered, if the parties are not amenable, perhaps alternative arrangements can be made with Bavaria. Trade concessions, perhaps. He waved a dismissive hand. Go, Eldridge. Take your countess. You are giving me a migraine. Victor offered the slightest bow, mocking in its precision. He turned to Amalia. I wish you happiness with your lieutenant, your highness. Amalia's lips curved in a genuine smile, radiant, freed. And I believe, Countess, you have found yours. Victor offered Lydia his arm. Together they walked from the salon, past stunned courtiers, into the crisp winter air where fresh snow had begun to blanket the palace courtyard. The moment the carriage doors closed, Victor pulled her into his lap. There was no restraint now. He kissed her fiercely, desperately, hands framing her face, lips claiming hers as though she were air and he had been drowning for years. Snowflakes melted against the heated windows. You were extraordinary, he murmured against her mouth, voice rough. When you spoke to her. I was fighting for us, Lydia whispered, fingers threading through his dark hair. You gave me armor. I finally learned to wield it. Victor drew back just enough to rest his forehead against hers. The mask was gone entirely now, only raw, unguarded emotion in his storm-gray eyes. I love you, Lydia, he said, the words fierce and unpolished. I have loved you since the amber gown, since the injured dog in the snow, since the moment you fed the swans your last crust of bread. I will love you until the stars burn out. Tears slipped down her cheeks, but she was smiling. And I love you, Victor. The man who saw me when I was invisible. The shadow who became my light. The carriage rolled through Vienna's hushed, snow-clad streets toward Eldridge Palace, toward home. Behind them, the old world of contracts and cold alliances receded. Ahead lay something new, a future forged not in duty or desperation but in fire and choice. The shadow of the Hofburg had not merely thawed. He had become a blaze capable of warming an empire, and he would burn anything that dared threaten the woman who had taught him how. Dawn broke over Vienna in a wash of rose and gold, the snow from the night before sparkling like scattered diamonds across the palace gardens. Lydia woke in the vast canopied bed of the Countess's suite, Victor's arm heavy and possessive across her waist. For a moment she lay still, listening to his steady breathing, marveling that this was real, that the man who had been legend and myth was now her husband in every sense. He stirred as she shifted, gray eyes opening instantly alert. A slow, unguarded smile curved his mouth, the first truly open smile she had ever seen from him. Good morning, my Countess, he murmured, voice husky with sleep. He brushed a curl from her forehead, the gesture tender. Good morning, my shadow, she whispered back, and he laughed softly, a low, genuine sound that warmed her more than the sunlight streaming through the windows. They lingered in bed longer than propriety allowed, mapping new territories of touch and trust, whispering promises against skin. When they finally descended for breakfast, The palace felt different, lighter, as though the ancestral suits of armor lining the hall stood a fraction less rigidly. News of the emperor's capitulation had already spread like wildfire through Vienna's salons. By noon, calling cards piled high in silver salvers. Invitations, congratulations, cautious overtures from those who had once cut Lydia in the street. The patronesses who had stormed the palace yesterday now sent notes dripping with honeyed admiration for the season's most romantic triumph. Victor read them with dry amusement, then tossed most into the fire. "Let them come groveling if they wish," he said. "But you will choose whom we receive." Lydia stood at the window overlooking the gardens, watching servants clear paths through the snow. She felt the weight of the gold signet ring, now resized and engraved inside with their intertwined initials, and marveled at how completely her world had shifted in a single day. A footman entered bearing a final missive on heavy Bavarian stationery. Victor broke the seal, scanned it, and handed it to her with a faint smile. Princess Amalia wrote in elegant script, an invitation to tea when she returned to Munich with her lieutenant, now officially betrothed, thanks to Victor's quiet negotiations releasing her from the old contract without scandal. Lydia laughed softly. "We seem to have started a fashion for love matches." "About time," Victor replied, coming to stand behind her, arms encircling her waist. He rested his chin atop her head. "Though I suspect ours will remain the most talked about for decades." In the weeks that followed, Vienna bent to the new reality. Baron Voss fled to his provincial estates in disgrace, his dual challenge quietly withdrawn when no seconds could be found willing to face the Count of Eldridge. Sir Reginald remained banished to the dower cottage, his allowance strictly monitored. Rumor said he had taken up gardening with sullen resignation. Lydia blossomed in her new role with quiet confidence. She redecorated rooms long shuttered, filled the palace with music and fresh flowers, and began charitable works, starting with a fund for injured animals, in memory of a certain muddy afternoon on the Graben. Victor watched her with unguarded pride, often abandoning ledgers to join her in the library or gardens, content simply to be near. One crisp spring evening, as they walked the snowmelt paths of the Prater where once she had fed swans alone, Victor stopped beneath an ancient oak. "I have something for you," he said, drawing a small velvet box from his coat. Inside lay a new ring, a band of white gold set with a single flawless sapphire, the exact shade of the suite where their marriage had begun. "The signet served its purpose," he said quietly. "This one is chosen only for you." Lydia's eyes filled as he slid it onto her finger beside the resized signet. "I never thank you properly," she said. "For seeing me, for waiting, for breaking all your rules." Victor cupped her face. "You were worth every rule I shattered, and I would break 1,000 more." He kissed her beneath the budding branches as the sun set over the Danube, painting the sky in fire. The shadow of the Hofburg was gone forever. In his place stood a man alive with passion, devotion, and joy, bound eternally to the woman who had taught him that true power lay not in isolation, but in choosing to love fiercely, openly, unapologetically. And Vienna, for all its whispers and schemes, could only watch in awe as the frost melted into enduring flame. The snow had stopped falling by late afternoon, leaving Vienna wrapped in a hushed, crystalline silence. In the private library, the heart of Victor's true world, firelight danced across leather-bound volumes and the charcoal sketch that now hung proudly above the mantel. Lydia stood before it, tracing the lines of her own forgotten act of kindness with wondering fingers. Victor watched her from the doorway, leaning against the frame with arms crossed. He had shed his coat and cravat, waistcoat unbuttoned, looking less like the formidable count and more like the man who had whispered promises in the dark hours before dawn. The vulnerability in his posture, the slight uncertainty in his eyes, was something only she would ever see. "You kept it all this time," she said softly, not turning. "Hidden away like a secret shame." "Not shame," he corrected, pushing off the doorframe to join her. "Treasure. I feared if I looked at it too often, the wanting would drive me mad." Lydia faced him then. Sunlight slanted through the tall windows, catching the sapphire at her throat, a gift he had fastened there himself that morning. "And now," he said, voice rough, "I fear nothing except losing you." He reached for her, but she caught his hands, holding them between them like a bridge. "Tell me the rest," she said. "The parts you have not said aloud. I need to know all of you, Victor, not just the shadow or the savior. The man." For a long moment he was silent, gray eyes searching hers. Then he nodded once and led her to the deep leather armchairs before the fire. He poured 2 glasses of brandy from a crystal decanter, offering her one though she rarely drank, and sat opposite her, close enough that their knees nearly touched. "My mother," he began, staring into the flames, "was beautiful the way a winter storm is beautiful, dazzling, merciless. She married my father for the title, the palaces, the power. He loved her with a desperation that consumed him. I was 12 when I found him in this very room, weeping over a letter from her latest lover. He died 2 years later, officially of a chill but truly of a broken heart." His fingers tightened around the glass. "I vowed never to be that weak. Never to let anyone close enough to wound me. So I became what they expected, cold, untouchable. The shadow. It was armor, Lydia. Effective armor." He looked at her then, "Raw. Until you walked through it without trying. Your quiet strength, your refusal to harden even when the world gave you every reason, it undid me piece by piece." Lydia set her brandy aside untouched and moved to kneel before him, taking his free hand in both of hers. "I was afraid too," she confessed. "Afraid of hoping. Afraid that kindness was a luxury I could no longer afford. Every time I helped someone, a stray animal, a fumbling musician, even the swans, I told myself it was foolish, that it changed nothing. But I could not stop. It was the only part of me the world had not managed to break." Victor's thumb brushed across her knuckles, echoing a gesture from the rain-soaked pavilion that felt a lifetime ago. "You were never broken," he said fiercely. "Bruised, yes. Bent, perhaps. But never broken. That is why I could not stay away." She rose then, settling into his lap as naturally as if she had always belonged there. His arms came around her instantly, holding her close. "There is more," he murmured against her hair. "The ledger I used today, the imperial debts, those were not merely good fortune. I built them deliberately. Over years. Every favor granted, every loan extended to the crown, every risky venture that paid off. I hoarded power like a dragon hoards gold. Not for wealth, but for leverage. For the day I might need to protect something, someone precious." Lydia pulled back to look at him. "You planned even then to defy the emperor if necessary?" "I planned to be untouchable," he corrected. "I did not know it would be for you. But yes, I prepared the battlefield long before I knew who I would fight for." A soft laugh escaped her, wonder rather than amusement. "You terrifying, brilliant man." He smiled faintly, the expression still new and wondrous on his severe features. "And you, my terrifying, brilliant woman. You faced a princess and an emperor today with nothing but truth and courage. I was proud and terrified I would lose you to your own fearlessness." They kissed then, slow and deep, the fire crackling beside them like approval. When they parted, Lydia rested her head against his shoulder. "What happens now?" she asked quietly. "Vienna will not forget this. They will test us." "Let them," Victor said, voice steady. "We have faced the worst they can offer and emerged stronger. The rest is merely noise." He reached into his waistcoat pocket and withdrew a small, folded paper. Unfolding it, he revealed a rough sketch, done hastily that morning, he admitted, of Lydia as she had appeared descending the staircase to confront Voss and his allies, chin high, eyes steady, every inch a countess. "I want to commission a proper portrait," he said. "But this is how I see you always. My lioness." Lydia traced the lines with a tender finger. "And I see you as the man who knelt in the mud to wrap a soaked, ruined girl in his coat. My guardian." Outside, dusk settled over the snow-covered gardens. Inside, they spoke long into the evening, of dreams for the estate in Lower Austria, of travels they might take when the season ended, of children who might one day run through these halls, filling them with laughter instead of silence. When night fully claimed the sky, Victor carried her to the connecting door between their suites, now permanently open, and laid her on the vast bed they had begun to share. As sleep claimed them, tangled together beneath silk and warmth, Lydia realized the truth. The sanctuary was not the library or the palace. It was here, in his arms, in the space where shadows met light and became something entirely new. They had regrouped not as separate wounded souls, but as partners forged in fire. And whatever Vienna threw at them next, they would face it side by side. The summons from the Hofburg arrived at dawn the day after the library confession, a liveried courier pounding on the palace doors while snow still swirled in the air. The imperial seal gleamed crimson and gold on heavy parchment. Victor read it in silence, face unreadable, then handed it to Lydia without a word. She scanned the elegant script. Their Graces the Count and Countess of Eldridge are commanded to attend His Imperial Majesty in the Crimson Salon at the 11th hour. The matter of the Bavarian alliance remains unresolved. Lydia's stomach nodded. They will not let it rest so easily. Victor's jaw tightened. No. The ambassador has rallied support. There are those at court who fear the precedent. If one great marriage can be set aside for love, others might follow. And the emperor dislikes losing. He turned to her, eyes fierce. You need not come. I can face this alone. Lydia set the summons down with steady hands. We face it together or not at all. A ghost of pride curved his mouth. He kissed her forehead, brief, reverent, then summoned his secretary to prepare the carriage and quietly the ledger. By 11 they rolled through the Hofburg gates under a sky heavy with unshed snow. Courtiers lined the corridors, whispering behind fans and gloved hands as the couple passed. Word had spread. The Shadow and his unexpected countess, summoned to answer for defying an imperial treaty. The Crimson Salon was more crowded than the day before. The emperor sat enthroned on a raised dais, flanked by advisors in stiff uniforms. The Bavarian ambassador stood smugly to one side. Princess Amalia was absent, already departed for Munich with her lieutenant, Victor had ensured, but her father's representative had arrived overnight, a dour prince regent eager for alliance. Yet the true surprise waited in the shadows. Baron Karl Voss, recalled from exile, standing among the emperor's inner circle with a triumphant sneer. Victor's stride did not falter, but Lydia felt his arm tense beneath her hand. They stopped before the dais. Protocol demanded deep bows. Victor offered only a precise nod. Lydia curtsied, elegant, unhurried. The emperor leaned forward. Eldridge, we had hoped yesterday's discussion concluded the matter. Yet new evidence has emerged. He gestured to Voss. Baron Voss brings witnesses who claim your marriage was coerced, that the lady was not in sound mind after her unfortunate incident at the opera. Voss stepped forward, voice oily. Respectfully, Your Majesty, the countess was hysterical, fleeing in distress. The count pursued her into the storm. Who knows what threats or promises were made in the dark? Reliable sources confirm she wept uncontrollably. Hardly the behavior of a willing bride. Murmurs rippled through the salon. Several courtiers nodded, those who had laughed at Lydia's humiliation now eager to rewrite history. Lydia felt old shame rise like bile, but she crushed it down. Victor's voice cut through the room like a blade. Lies dressed as concern, sire. The Baron speaks from wounded pride, after publicly insulting my wife and receiving my challenge for it. Voss flushed. A challenge issued in haste, later withdrawn when cooler heads. Withdrawn, Victor said coldly, because no honorable man would stand second to a coward. Gasps echoed. The emperor's eyes narrowed. The Bavarian prince regent interjected in accented German. Personal quarrels aside, the contract stands. Honor demands the count fulfill his father's pledge. Set aside this irregular union, and Bavaria will consider the debt settled. Victor's hand tightened on Lydia's. She felt the storm gathering in him, the lethal calm before thunder. He reached slowly into his coat and withdrew the ledger. The room stilled. They remembered yesterday's threat. But this time Victor did not open it. Instead he looked directly at the emperor. Your Majesty speaks of honor, he said quietly. Let us examine it. He turned to the assembly, voice carrying to every corner. For 20 years I have served the empire without question. I funded the Schönbrunn restorations when the treasury faltered. I underwrote the Congress loans that kept Europe stable. I have paid, in coin and silence, for every imperial indulgence recorded in these pages. He held the ledger aloft, then let it fall open on a nearby table, pages fluttering like accusing wings. But honor is not a ledger balanced by threats. Honor is keeping one's word when no one compels it. He turned to Lydia, taking both her hands in his. I gave my word to this woman, in a chapel before God, with no witness but rain and candlelight. I will not break it. Not for Bavaria. Not for Vienna. Not for the empire itself. A hush deeper than any before settled. Then Lydia spoke, clear, unwavering. I was not coerced, she said, meeting the emperor's gaze directly. I was rescued, from cruelty this very court condoned. Baron Voss humiliated me before hundreds. Not one voice rose in my defense. Only one man acted. She turned to Voss, eyes blazing. You spilled wine on me deliberately, then called it my clumsiness. You offered degradation as charity. And now you stand here, rewriting my tears as hysteria to salvage your pride. Voss opened his mouth, but no sound emerged. Lydia faced the dais again. If honor is the issue, then let it be tested. Annul this marriage, and you do not gain an alliance. You lose the loyalty of every peer who sees that imperial whim can shatter sacred vows. You teach us that promises mean nothing when power demands otherwise. The emperor shifted uncomfortably. Advisors exchanged uneasy glances. Victor spoke once more, voice low but resonant. I am prepared to call in every debt today. The treasury will collapse by nightfall. But I would rather not. I would rather serve an empire that values honor above convenience. He paused, letting the weight settle. The choice is yours, sire. Seconds stretched into eternity. Snow began to fall outside the tall windows, soft and silent. Finally, the emperor exhaled, a sound almost of defeat. He waved a weary hand. Enough. The matter is closed. The count's marriage stands. Bavaria will negotiate new terms. The Bavarian prince-regent bowed stiffly and withdrew. Voss slunk away, face ashen. As the salon emptied in stunned silence, the emperor beckoned Victor closer. You play a dangerous game, Eldridge, he muttered. Victor's reply was soft, for royal ears alone. Only when the stakes are worth it, Majesty. Outside, in the falling snow, Victor handed Lydia into the carriage. The doors had scarcely closed before he pulled her against him, burying his face in her hair. I thought I might lose you, he whispered, voice breaking for the first time. You never will, she answered, holding him tightly. We won the war today. He laughed, shaky, disbelieving. We did. As the carriage rolled home through whitening streets, Lydia rested her head on his shoulder. The final confrontation was over. They had faced empire, court, and past ghosts, and emerged not merely victorious but whole. The shadow and his lioness, bound by choice and fire, unbreakable. Spring arrived in Vienna like a long-held breath finally released. The snow that had blanketed the city through their trials melted into the Danube, carrying away the last traces of winter's grip. Cherry blossoms burst along the Prater, and the formal gardens of Eldridge Palace transformed into riots of color. Tulips in crimson and gold, hyacinths perfuming the air. Lydia stood on the terrace one warm May morning, watching gardeners plant new rose beds where once only austere evergreens had stood. She wore a simple gown of pale jonquil muslin, the sapphire ring Victor had given her glinting on her finger beside the resized gold signet. A gentle breeze lifted her hair, and she closed her eyes, savoring the sunlight on her face. Footsteps sounded behind her, familiar, unhurried. Victor's arms slid around her waist, his chin resting on her shoulder. He had abandoned formal coats for lighter waistcoats in these private moments, and she leaned back against his warmth. Contemplating your empire, Countess? He murmured, lips brushing her ear. Our empire, she corrected, turning in his arms to face him. And yes, I was thinking how far we have come since that rainy night. His gray eyes softened, the storm in them long calmed into something deeper, steadier. A lifetime ago. In the months since the final confrontation at the Hofburg, Vienna had bent, then bowed to the new reality. The emperor's public acceptance of their marriage, grudging at first, became genuine admiration when Victor quietly forgave a portion of the imperial debts as a wedding gift to the crown. Bavaria negotiated new trade terms without rancor. Princess Amalia sent letters from Munich filled with news of her own joyful marriage to her lieutenant. Baron Voss vanished entirely from society, his estate sold to cover debts he could no longer defer. Whisper said he had fled to the Americas. No one mourned his absence. Sir Reginald remained in the dower cottage, tending roses with reluctant diligence under the watchful eye of a steward. Occasional letters arrived, stiff, formal requests for small indulgences that Lydia reviewed with Victor before granting or denying. Forgiveness had come slowly in measured doses, but the power to choose had healed something deep within her. The palace itself had changed most of all. Rooms long shuttered were opened and aired. Music filled the halls. Lydia played the pianoforte in the evenings while Victor listened, sometimes joining her with a violin he had not touched since boyhood. They hosted small gatherings now, not the stiff court affairs of old, but evenings of conversation, laughter, and genuine connection. Young women once shunned by society found quiet sponsorship through Lydia's new charitable circle. Stray animals from the streets found homes in the stables or with grateful tenants. One evening in June, as fireflies danced over the gardens, Victor led her blindfolded down a path newly graveled. Patience, he chided when she laughed and tried to peek. He stopped and removed the silk scarf from her eyes. Before them stood a small folly, a white marble pavilion nestled among the roses, its columns carved with intertwined lions and stags. At its center, on a pedestal, rested the framed charcoal sketch from the library, the moment she had bound the injured dog's paw. "I wanted you to have a place that remembers where we began," he said quietly. "Not the opera, not the storm, but the first time I truly saw your heart." Tears blurred her vision as she stepped forward to touch the frame. "You keep making me cry happy tears," she accused, voice thick. He came up behind her, arms encircling her once more. "I intend to spend the rest of my life doing exactly that." That autumn, news arrived that confirmed what they had both quietly hoped. Lydia was expecting their first child. Victor's reaction, stunned joy followed by fierce protectiveness, made her laugh even as he insisted on carrying her upstairs, just in case. Vienna, ever hungry for romance, declared there's the love story of the century. Ballads were composed about the shadow and the lioness. Painters begged for sittings. But the couple kept most of their life private, emerging only when they chose. On the anniversary of that fateful opera night, they returned, not to the hall, but to the gardens where Victor had found her in the rain. The pavilion there had been repaired and adorned with lanterns. A single table waited beneath its shelter, set for two. They dined simply, bread, wine, memories, then danced to no music but the rustle of leaves and distant city bells. Victor held her close, one hand splayed over the gentle curve where their child grew. "I was a ghost before you," he said against her temple. "Existing, not living. You brought me back to life. And you gave me a voice," she answered. "A home. A future I never dared dream." He drew back to look at her, moonlight silvering his features. "The frost is gone forever," he said. "Because of you." Lydia smiled, rising on her toes to kiss him. "Then let us keep the flames burning bright." Years later, when their children asked how their parents had fallen in love, Lydia and Victor would tell different versions. Hers full of courage and rescue, his of quiet watching and a heart finally brave enough to claim its truth. But both versions ended the same way. With a man once called the shadow of the Hofburg smiling openly, unashamedly, as he held the woman who had taught him that true power lay not in isolation or ice, but in choosing every day to love fiercely and without reserve. And Vienna, for all its schemes and seasons, could only watch and wonder as the frost melted into enduring radiant dawn.